your book, God, Sex, and Rich People, it has everything that somebody wants in a book. It has sex, has humor, has more sex. In the first few pages, when you use the terms repeatedly, bag of dicks and getting unfucked, I knew I was in for a good time.
I was going through the sort of like toughest years of my deconstruction, which are the years that I wrote about, years 1 through 3. I got to truly figure out who I wanted to be. No one gave a fuck who I was fucking, where I was fucking.
Give a rundown of how someone should map out their sexual ethic.
Yeah, I think the way that you map out your sexual ethic.
This is the Writers Are People Too podcast, where I can't get writers to stop talking about themselves. And tonight, I'm sure will be no exception. We have Mattie Jo Cowsert. Did I say your name right?
Cowsert. It's phonetic.
Cowsert, okay.
It just has the word cow in it. Yeah.
All right. Mattie Jo Cowsert. So your book, God, Sex, and Rich People. I loved it. Though screw
Wait, you finished the whole thing?
Yes. Screw you because you only gave me 1 day to read it, but I did love it.
I'm so impressed you finished it in 1 day. Amazing.
Well, thank you. Yes. I was, maybe I took a little time off work or something like that. Don't tell anybody.
Okay.
I do get lunch breaks. So, it has everything that somebody wants in a book. It has sex. It has humor. It has more sex. And, in the first few pages, when you use the terms repeatedly, bag of dicks and getting unfucked, I knew I was in for a good time. So it's quite funny, and your writing is witty and sarcastic, but also it's very intimate. So what drove you to write something so vulnerable?
I say this in the intro of my book. When I was going through the sort of like toughest years of my deconstruction, which are the years that I wrote about, years 1 through 3, I would say, before I went into like another chapter of it, I just would have loved to feel less alone. And I just hoped that maybe if I could share these very nuanced thoughts that I was having, that maybe other people could read and go like, oh my God, me too. I just wanted people to feel less alone. And I know how much reading literature has helped me with that over the years. So I just sort of wanted to pay it forward. And I love that you use the word intimate, because that's really what I wanted. I wanted this to feel like, we're just on a road trip together. We're just gabbing, Yeah.
Yeah. And, going back to the term intimate, this is a memoir. And, every page that you've written, is this exactly what's going on in Mattie's head? Sorry, Mattie Jo or Mattie? Is it all together?
Mattie Jo or MJ.
Okay.
Lots of people call me MJ because
right.
Mattie Jo's kind of like,
hey, I'm the only
syllables.
MJ here, okay?
So yes, that's
Mattie
right.
Jo.
You're MJ too. Yes, of course.
Matthew
so Mattie
James,
Jo. Yes.
So what's good? What's on the page? Is that the unfiltered, unadulterated, raw version of what's going on in Mattie Jo's head, or are you like rewriting this to make it a little bit more entertainment value?
How I write is very much how I speak, for sure. Like if you're reading the book, that is my voice. And that's something that I feel like I've been able to do well, because I just didn't even consider myself a writer for a really long time. So I didn't have these like ideas of what it meant to be a writer, right? Like this is how one should sound when they write. I didn't have any of that. So I was just like, here's how I write, And so it's definitely not unfiltered, right? Because it's a book, so you have to get it edited a bajillion times and learn, how to land a joke, what details are actually imperative to the story and which ones you can do without, so it's not completely unfiltered, but in terms of the voice, for sure, those are the things that were like legitimately going through my head. This is not like a persona I am putting on. This was me like fully tapping into, me as a person, how I speak, but also where I was at that time.
All right. Well, now that I've indulged you in talking about your writing process and publishing, like you asked, let's get back into the purity culture thing, which I'm sure you're dreading. So this is the first time we've chatted, and I like you a lot because, again, the vulnerability thing, that's super awesome. But I think a lot of it comes to the fact that we were like raised in very similar ways. like so many of the things you were saying, I was like, oh, that's me. Like, oh, I don't have to go to the glossary for, 90% of the things because I know what those are. Like, I was raised almost like
Yeah.
people would call it like a cult. Like, I'll call it a cult
Mm-hmm.
light. Like, there's no Kool-Aid. It was
Mm-hmm.
one of the non-denominational churches that you so fondly referenced in your book, though it wasn't quite as cool as you were making it out to be.
Wait,
Um,
Hillsong? Were you part of Hillsong?
I was not part of Hillsong. No, it
Oh,
was.
what's the other
You
one?
probably
James
never heard of it.
River?
It was called the Fellowship. It
I
was it
mean,
was super culty. You can look us
right.
up online.
Well, that's like, fellowship, right? It's like, where's the Starbucks in New York City? That's like pretty generic, but I haven't heard of
Yeah.
it specifically, the fellowship. Okay,
Yeah, you could,
cool.
if you really wanted to dig, you could go and find some dirt and some my family's names in there, and
But
we're not here to talk
listen,
about me though.
I know the brand though, right? I know the
Yeah,
non-denom brand well. Yeah.
yeah. So all that to say, like a lot of your experiences were hitting close to home.
Mm-hmm.
Um, would you say that your target audience is for people who grew up like us, so we can all commiserate together, or is this for more like a secular crowd, so they can see why we're so screwed up?
It's both. It's a yes and. No, yeah. I remember getting that question a lot, and I spoke about this with my editor because as she was reading it, she was like, "This is fascinating." Like for someone who grew up on the East Coast, was raised Jewish, like this was like an anthropological study, but entertaining, right? So she was like, I think we need to gear this towards the person, like as well as your audience who will know all of this. Let's try to write it in a way that also can target people like me who want an insider's look. And so I wasn't sure if I did that well, but I think I did because many people have gotten back to me and been like, I can't believe how like educational this was, or I've had friends who have said, or like women, like people I don't even know, right? Be like, I'm going to have my partner read this so he can understand me better. So I
Mm,
think it's both. I think it's for people who, there's general deconstruction of like, yeah, I don't believe in that anymore. Yeah, I don't believe in that anymore. But like, the cellular stuff and the nuanced stuff that I speak about, like how evangelicalism makes women hate themselves and makes us so fearful of being confident, let alone confident in our bodies. Like, how dare we feel sexy? How dare we believe we are sexy, right? Like any of those things.
modest is
How
hottest.
modest is hottest, baby. Yeah. Or the pedestalization of male attention. And I know there's the whole concept of like the male gaze, but oh my gosh, it's like you can leave evangelicalism and still just be absolutely obsessed with the idea of getting into a relationship and
Mhm.
doing things you don't actually want to do just to like be in a relationship, right? It's like it's just
Yeah.
settling or whatever. Or I talk about this in my involvement with Fuckboy Monster. The character Fuckboy Monster is like, I would rather sleep with this person who was treating me like hot garbage than just go out and sleep with other people because I didn't want to increase my number, right?
Mm,
Those sort of cellular ways and nuanced ways, that is definitely for my evangelical readers. But I think people outside of it can totally read this and be like, this is crazy. Like,
yeah.
and the way that I explain it all, right, with either in the text or in the back in the glossary, which I had so much fun with. That was my favorite part of the writing. Yeah.
Well, and I think a lot of it was interesting to see like the female perspective from what I grew up with the male perspective in the same culture. Like, for
Mm-hmm.
example, now again, perhaps my family was a little bit more strict than others, but my parents more or less told me like women were out to break my heart and give me AIDS. And so I had to like, yeah, I know you laugh at me now, but I had to like work through all this trauma, and like I was afraid
Yeah.
to talk to women because I was afraid that people would like look at me and think that I was trying to hit on a woman and that was like unpure.
Yeah.
And like, so I get all of that. Now, the
Mm-hmm.
ways that I went about, fixing myself, I didn't go to New York and rail a bunch of dudes. Though I'm sure people would love to see a movie about that in my life. But it, but
Yes.
we all had to like get through our traumas in our own ways. And
Mm-hmm.
so you do talk a lot about deconstruction. So is this book more about like a warning of toxic Christianity, or is this more about a story of you coming into your womanhood?
Again, both. Definitely. But I do think it's a coming of age, for sure. It's a coming of age specifically from evangelicalism and purity culture. So I hope that when people read this, in terms of the like warning of toxic Christianity, they can go, oh, crap, and kind of let it sit with them. I even had someone reach out today to be like, after even just reading the intro of your book, I'm realizing how little I trust myself. And I never linked that to my religious upbringing, but this need for an external source to approve my decisions is so strong, and I didn't realize. So I hope that
Yeah.
people read it and can point out, the ways that or connect the dots for themselves. But I do think it is a coming of age story as well, just within the container of evangelicalism, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Because that so many women go through similar things, but I think within the container of just how much the church like makes you hate yourself, from the ideology of like original sin, right? How you can't trust yourself, all of your thoughts are bad, the only way it's good is if it's of the Lord, if it's of the Holy Spirit, right? You can't do anything on your own, you need God's guidance. If you are living for yourself, you are blaspheming the Holy Spirit, right? Like all of these
Mm-hmm.
things that specific to the evangelical experience of coming into your adulthood or womanhood. I do think it's that as well.
So let's put aside for a moment Christianity's less than perfect packaging. Just the baby again,
I
just
just
going for it.
can't. I'm like, what the fuck is this baby doing burpees? Like, what is happening?
I'm gonna send you a
Oh my
video
god.
after this, like a little skit that's hilarious.
Is it from
Um,
Portlandia? Because I know exactly
it
what
might
you're
be. It
talking
might be
about.
actually.
Oh my gosh. Anyway, sorry,
um,
go ahead.
I forgot what I was gonna say. Oh yeah.
I'm
So
so sorry.
you're fine. I get derailed all the time. It's part of being married. So Christianity obviously less than perfect packaging, threats of fire for premarital coitus, all this stuff. Do you think that the message is well intended, even
Mm.
in light of all of the poor packaging, or is this just oppression?
That is such a great question. I think there are individuals who are truly well intentioned. I think of my mom, for example, and my dad, honestly. They taught us, and I know you know this because you've read the book, but like they taught us abstinence, or not abstinence, but like sex only within a marriage at home. And I really think that they had good intentions, because my mom had such bad experiences in high school that she didn't want us to relive that. She really felt like she was protecting us. And for my dad, he had only ever been with my mom. So he was just trying, like, he feels like he did what felt right for him emotionally. And where that is the safest is within a marriage, where sex is the safest, is emotionally and otherwise, is within a marriage. That I truly believe they were just trying to protect us and help us have the most fulfilling sex life. And for my father, it was within a marriage, and for my mom, it was within a marriage. But I don't, and so I think there are individuals who truly are well intentioned. Where it gets dicey for me is when people are so adamant on the dogma that they
Mm-hmm.
can't open their minds to like maybe there's another way. So I feel like for my parents, many of their kids grew up and weren't married my brother just got married, he's 40, like my sister and I are not married. I only have one sister who got married young. When my parents saw that we had other priorities besides marriage, they didn't keep harping on the fact that we should save ourselves until marriage. They were like, you're adults, you'll figure it out. um
Mm-hmm.
so when people can't let that go, let the dogma go, and like insist that this is how it must be, they might be well intentioned, but like I still think for them it's a need to be right, and it's a need for control. And I definitely think the systems, like the cults that aren't really cults, but they're kind of cults, the kind of cult, can of cult, like you, I don't, I don't know that those people are well-intentioned. I think it is for power, whether
Yeah.
they recognize it in themselves or not. Because if it wasn't, like, don't you think they could get to a place where they're kind of like, yeah, well, this is for me, but maybe it's not for everyone. But the fact that they're like, that's what purity culture is, right? Like Erica Smith talked about this on my panel at my book launch party on Friday. Like, purity culture is, this is what I believe, and so you too have to believe it. And so that, I just don't know. Like, if it were truly just like, this is what I think is best, but like, if it's not good for you, that's fine. Okay. But that's not how it is for most people. It's like, no, this is right. And I know because God says so.
Yeah.
And if you don't do it, you're going to hell. And
Yeah.
like, that to me is just, I talk about fear mongering for the purposes of social control. I just kind of do think a lot of Christians are that.
Yeah. No, I get you. Again, I grew up in it, so you're preaching
Yeah.
to the choir here.
Yeah. Literally.
Um, so your parents seemed rather supportive of you overall. I was glad to see that in the book. But for people who don't have supportive family or are stuck into a church or a cult or religion, whatever you want to call it, that they don't have the support that you had to be able to escape it, what kind of advice would you give them?
So I think, something I talk about a lot is the anonymity that New York City gave me.
Mm.
Like, I got to truly figure out who I wanted to be because I got here and I realized, cursing coming up, no one gave a fuck who I was fucking, where I was fucking, if I was saying the word fucking, like no one
Mhm.
cared, right? And so I had to really decide, what do I care about? And then I also realized that I had geographical privilege to talk about the things I was talking about because I wasn't in the epicenter of it all, otherwise known as the buckle of the Bible Belt. My entire community wasn't going to shun me if I spoke out about these things. And I realized not everybody has that privilege. But I will say that if you are trying to untangle some of this stuff, and it's tough when it's your family and everything, but I do think you have to remove yourself from the community. I don't know how much true untangling, questioning, curiosity, entertaining you can do within the church, or within the culture, I guess I should say, because many times church culture sort of masquerades as like encouraging curiosity, but they want you to come to the same answer that they have, right? And if you
Mhm.
come to a different answer, well, then no, you can't be part of our club, right?
Yeah.
So I just don't know how much freedom you can actually have if you're in that. And then I would say that, I have a chapter in my book called A Note About Friends and Family. I think what you have to do, even though it's hard because, deconstruction is really just like the phases of grief. So in part of that phase, you're going to be angry. I think to the best of your ability, you have to give these people the grace that you were taught only God gives. And you just have to go, they don't know what they don't know. That's okay. And stand in your confidence as a curious person and just let it be okay. And then maybe just don't talk about certain things. Like when it comes to your family, just like avoid certain topics. I actually think that's okay, you know?
Mhm. Yeah. Um, if someone looks at your story, they may see feminism embodied, like
Mm-hmm.
empowered feminism embodied, but I see a lot of pain that you went
Mm-hmm.
through to get to where you're at now. So,
Mm-hmm.
knowing what you know now, would you change anything if you could still end up the person that you are now? Like if you could just remove all the pain that you went through, all the
Mm-hmm.
feminist choices, if you would call it that, and still end up at the same place, would you, or would you encourage people to go through what you went through?
Like what I call like the necessary pendulum and all of
Yeah.
that. Um, hmm. So that's tough because I think one of the biggest parts, which I don't talk about in my book, right? Because I say I think this is a whole other book. One of the most painful parts of my story is that I was date raped. And of course I didn't want to go through that.
Yeah.
Of course I didn't. But also that wasn't my fault. So like, can I say I should have done something differently? I suppose the only thing differently I could have done is just not gone home with him, but who's to say he wouldn't have done it another time, you know? So I didn't do anything for that to happen. So I guess if we get into the the specifics of it all, but because of that event, it changed everything for me. You know, I had to wrestle with calling Planned Parenthood and asking to get tested, and them sending me to the ER to get set up with a social worker and a therapist and a doctor and get a rape kit and all of these things. And suddenly, like, I'm having to wrestle with the fact that, like, I am a person. I am the kind of girl who gets raped, and then wrestle with all those ideas, like, what kind of girl gets raped? You know, all of these preconceived ideas of what I think that kind of girl is, right? Now I'm that kind of girl. All of these things, it changed everything for me. So I don't know. Yeah, of course I didn't want to go through that, but I don't think that I would be who I am today without that. I think the only thing that I would probably change is my safety. I didn't take it seriously in my 20s, specifically in the time that I like am writing this book about. I was very unsafe. I was finding, I mean, I remember, I don't talk about this in the book, but I remember I went on a first date with a guy that I met through a mutual friend at like a bar, and the first date was at his apartment, and he like made me dinner, which is like a red flag. Like, just we just don't do that, right? But I went to his apartment. It was near my apartment, whatever. Drank too much. I was always drinking too much. And then I woke up to him like snorting cocaine right next to me. And I just look back at that and I'm like, what was I thinking? Like, and I just was in so many, and ironically, those were not even the situations where I was harmed the most, right? The one that I was harmed the most was just like a really good date I was enjoying. But I think, you know, like I had another situation where I went home with this guy and he like threw up all over me. And then I had to like shower him, and I'm drunk, but I'm showering him, you know, like situations like that. And it's like, this is a stranger, but I just didn't know what I didn't know. I think I would have just been a little safer.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in your book, you talk about mapping out your sexual ethic.
Mm-hmm.
For those of you who have not read the book, well, you've read the book, you wrote it. For those who have not read the book, give a rundown of how someone should map out their sexual ethic.
Right.
Aside from a
So,
religion, let me clarify that.
yes. So I call it so the title I want for my next book is God, Sex, and Rich People, Part 2, A Blueprint for Boning. So sexual ethic, blueprint for boning. I
I
guess
feel like the
if you're
title was a little more vulgar than that. I think I could pull it up.
how to unfuck yourself from purity culture and finally get fucked. I think
There
it
we
was
go. That
something
was
like
one of the
that. Yeah.
unfucks that I remember. Yes.
Yeah. Um, so yeah, I think the way that you map out your sexual ethic, I mean, I think it's like multiple steps, but sort of a baseline is just ask yourself, how do you want to feel in a sexual encounter? How do you want to feel with that person? Okay, then how would you get to a place where you felt that way? And this can be based on ideas that you have or lived experience and data. So I have this blog called Winning London, where I have like great casual sex for the first time with this guy in the UK. And basically, what I figured out about that experience is like, I don't actually need to be like in a super committed relationship to have like an amazing sexual experience where I feel safe, which is what I thought, right? I thought the reason all the sex I was having was bad was because he wasn't my boyfriend or whatever. But what I figured out about that situation is like, no, I actually just want to feel respected. I want to feel like he likes me, and he likes me for more than just my body, but for my brain and my intellect as well. And I want to feel safe. And if I feel respected, and like he likes me for my brain and my body and safe, then like that's going to be a good time, because from there you can get more comfortable, right? And then like, okay, that's a start. then how do you feel more comfortable with a person to like speak up for what you want sexually, right? I think the reason most people have bad sex is because they just don't even know how they want to feel with a person before they have sex. And so they end up in situations with people they don't even really want to sleep with, but they kind of feel like they have to because that's the expectation or whatever. Um, and the cool thing about your sexual ethic is it can change over time. Eventually, my sexual ethic did change. I haven't. There's the other chapter called "Too Soon" in the book where I talk about how I figured out, okay, at some point I just don't want to sleep with guys who it doesn't seem like it's leading towards a relationship. So I'm going to take a little bit more time to get to know them, to see what their intentions are, and so it can evolve, right? But yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
And we don't want to give too much away. They still got to buy your book.
Right. You got to buy the book. Sorry. Yes.
So this question, it moves a little bit away from purity culture. And it's more looking for your outlook on life now, we could say it. So you've pinned yourself as a recovering evangelical. So what is the lens now that you view Christianity through, or God, and are the two even combined?
Yeah, I would say they're not combined. I get the sort of like spiritual and symbolic approach to Christianity that, for instance, Returning to Eden lays out, that book I mentioned earlier. Um, I get it. And I think I can apply it to my life, but I don't think you need Christianity to have access to God. I think it's like one avenue, but you don't need it. So where I'm at with my spirituality, actually, I talked about this recently on an interview with Brian Recker, is that I feel like when people deconstruct, they often deconstruct their theology, and in the process they lose their spirituality, when actually our spirituality is the thing that like brought us to the theology to begin with. So like my spiritual experiences as a teenager that were available to me because I was just like so pure of heart and so open, right? Um I had those, and because of those I was like, "Oh my gosh, God is real. I want this to be part of my life." And then like the Christian evangelical church co-opted that experience and said, "Okay, but you can only have access to that experience if you do everything that we say, if you read your Bible every day, if you journal, if you're praying every day, if you memorize scripture, if you save yourself until marriage," right? They slapped all these conditions on access to the divine. And they truly, I mean, literally the fucking, what is it called? I talk about it in my book, the bridge analogy, right? It's like, here's God and here's sin, and here's the depths of your sin. And if you don't have Jesus Christ, you're going to
And the
fall into the
cross
depths
goes
of your sin.
across.
Yeah. Like if you, like, they're literally saying that you only have access to the divine if you believe in Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. And I just don't believe that. And I want to, at this phase in my life, I actually want to get back to that spirituality that I had as a teenager, that like pureness of heart connection to the divine, because I still experience it from time to time for sure throughout my life. I've just been like, I mean, even like publishing with choir, right? And seeing like how everything played out. I'm like, yes, this was divine timing. I could have never done this as well as forces on the outside did. But that like intimate connection, it's happened here and there, but I haven't had it. I don't know. I haven't like really cultivated that connection in a while. And I want to. But yeah, I absolutely don't think it's tied to Christianity. That being said, I am very much still connected to Jesus. Like, how could I not be, right? Or like the figure of Jesus. There's this book called The Book of Longings, and it's fiction by Sue Monk Kidd, but it is so good. And when I read that book, I was like, this is the Jesus of my spirituality. And I just sobbed like so much through that book because I was like, I feel like I hate that this is fiction because it feels real to me. Yeah.
Growing up the way we did, and I'm sure you have friends like this as well, and actually, let me back up another step here. So the cult that I grew up in when I was in junior high or so, it all fell apart for reasons I won't get into. Um, and I have friends, and my family had friends, and my parents had friends at the time that basically said, this is all fake, fuck God, none of this is real, we're done. And so I have friends that went that way, and then I have friends who grew up with me that have 12 kids and go to church 3 times a week, and there's just this huge dichotomy, and there was such a rift when this happened. Now, personally, I think I have a more middle of the road, perhaps reasonable expectation of life and religion and God and all that stuff. But it's interesting just to see how people react when life doesn't go as they planned.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's so interesting. I spoke to someone recently who was like, I didn't even deconstruct. I just broke up with religion. And I was like, that sounds so much easier than what I did. Like a clean slate, just like rip the band-aid off. That would have been great. But above all, I am a Virgo. So I was like, I must know everything. I think, going into the scripture studies and research and everything was so important to me because it was like scripture was so important to me. Yeah, I am definitely at a point now though. Like I had someone else ask me recently, like, how do you deal with faith differences in relationship post deconstruction? And I have this joke where like one time I went on a date and this guy goes, "So you were raised evangelical, right?" And I just like nodded and I was like, "Yeah." And I was like, that is the kind of religious ignorance I need in my dating life. Like, I just didn't care if these guys knew anything about how I dated. And for a long time, or how I was raised, how I was raised for a long time, it's like I felt like I wanted someone who got it. And then the further away I got from it, the less I cared. And like now my partner, like he doesn't care at all. Like he's not spiritual. Like he's just like, he's raised in like an Italian Catholic family, but like it wasn't a big deal. And that's kind of the way I like it.
I thought it was endearing when I was reading your book, and I think it was First Tinder Date Guy. Don't quote me on that.
Yeah.
And you were like talking about like all the religion stuff, and I was like, oh, Mattie Jo, come on, Bill, don't do
Oh,
that.
sweet. Yes. Yeah, I get this like very drawn out. It's not so much about the religion as much as the relationship aspect. And he's like, bummer. It's just like, yeah.
And you mentioned the editing process. I was going to go through all this later, but since you brought it up, so tell me a little bit about the editing process. And your publisher's Choir, is that correct?
Yeah, Choir.
Okay. So did they hook you up with an editor, or was that all pre-done?
No. So, oh my gosh, that process was insane. I don't know if you want me to start at the very, very beginning, but the editor I ended up going with was pre-Choir. I didn't learn about Choir until like, I want to say February of 2024. So, not that long ago, honestly, considering we released the book a week ago.
Congratulations.
So, thank you. So, long story short, and we can go into the weeds of it, later if you want, but I had gotten a publishing offer and in 2020 and I turned it down because it was shit and like for many reasons. And then I was pretty devastated about that. But then I just decided, okay, I'm going to model this after like the traditional publishing process because I had a bunch of friends who had been traditionally published. So I kind of knew what the process was, right? You submit a fresh draft, then you get your main revisions, you do it again, you get it into beta readers' hands, then you do more revision, and then you do another round yourself, and then give it back to your editor, and then it gets to a copy editor, right? Like that's what I was modeling that after. So I actually ended up hiring I decided I was going to self-publish after that publishing offer fell through, and I hired freelance an editor from Simon and Schuster. So I was working with one of their editors freelance, and I just got really, really lucky because like she doesn't take a ton of freelance work. Obviously she's got her hands full at one of the biggest publishing houses, but luckily one of my other friends, Olive, had worked with her, and Olive like just highly, highly recommended me, and then it ended up just being amazing. So she was incredible. She was the perfect editor for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we talked about editing. Then what's the publishing process in general been like working with Choir?
With Choir has been great. They are what's known as a hybrid publisher. So I'm sure your audience is aware, but like if not, there's a traditional publisher, right? Who like you how it normally goes is you submit a manuscript to to agents, and then the agents get you a publisher, and the publisher gives you an advance, and then you write the book under that publisher, and then everything is in-house from there. So you have your editor in-house, your copy editor in-house, your cover artist in-house, all of that. And where I was in the process, I had already done so much of it on my own. Like I had an editor, I had a copy edit, like all of that. So when I met Choir and they were like, oh, we'll take it from here, and what we do is you give us an already finished manuscript, and then we typeset it, and then we do the cover art, and we do all the back end stuff like on the selling channels and distribution. We handle your royalties. And obviously choir has like choir casts, so they have a whole bunch of podcasts that they do, and like affiliates with other podcasts. So there's a
Mm-hmm.
decent amount of PR that they do, way more than a traditional publisher actually. And I was already doing PR myself anyway, like I had hired a publicist. And so yeah, my experience with them again has been really good for exactly what I needed, because I had so much of it already done. I just needed some help shepherding it into the world.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Gotcha.
And they've been so complimentary. They're like, just yeah, and it's been a good it's been a good experience in terms of me having to advocate for myself and be really clear, because they just learned about me, right, like in February, so we're not super
Mm-hmm.
familiar. I feel like they have a pretty tight knit community of writers and whatnot, and I just sort of like came in as the new girl. And so yeah, yeah, again, I think they were the right publisher for me.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think I don't know the exact number, but I think you're like maybe the 10th author from Choir I've had or so.
Oh
Um,
really?
so everybody that I've met from there is super nice and lovely. So that's cool.
Yeah.
To take another one off the box. We'll see if you're nice and lovely as this continues, but
Sorry, I was just looking at my boyfriend. We just moved into a new place. Our apartment is incredible. The only downside is we have like an elephant baby upstairs that just like it sounds like they're gonna come through the ceiling at any point, and I'm looking at him like, how is this baby so loud? But anyway, sorry.
you're fine. You're fine. So timeline, walk me
Mhm.
through that from what years you were experiencing all this stuff to when you decided to write and then now through
Mhm.
publication.
Yeah, so I moved to New York City when I was 20. So 2013 is when I moved to the city. I wrote my and released my first blog post called God and the Gays, um, when marriage equality passed in 2015. So that was the birth of God, Sex, and Rich People Figuring Out Faith, Fucking in the 1%, was 2015. And then I just sort of like loosely wrote like here and there. And then I met but like it was getting a decent amount of buzz. Like everyone was like, "Oh my god, I love your blog!" And it was like my dad was going to the grocery store back home, and people being like, "Oh my gosh, I love your daughter's blog," And so that was really cool. And I was like, "Oh wow!" Like I just didn't even expect it. Again, like I said, I didn't even consider myself a writer, so that was weird. And then in 2018, yeah, I was transitioning out of musical theater, but I didn't know what my next phase of my creative career was going to be. So I hired a career coach who specializes in creatives. And when I did sort of like my onboarding with her, if you will, she was like, "So tell me about this blog." And then she read my blog and she was like, "Mattie Jo, you're a really good writer." So she sort of helped me like weave in my writing to actually be a part of my identity as a creative, which I was really hesitant about, because I was like, no, I'm not a writer. Like my brother is a writer, and he's always been like the real writer in the family. So he got into this like really prestigious program when he was like 16, got into at USC, got into this film writing program, huge scholarship, like whatever. He was a professor for writing. So I was like, I don't want to take his creative thing. I've got my creative thing. But then it just kept going, and she really helped me learn how to like better craft my blog posts and make it more consistent, continue to build an audience, and then like how does this um like coalesce into my acting career as well, like where the overlap. And so I ended up like booking a lot of acting work in the purity culture space, sort of like coincidentally, if you will. um and then in 2020, the world shut down, right? And I was like, okay, I guess I'm gonna write this book now. And I didn't know exactly what that looked like, but I just started writing. And then and it was really important for me for God, Sex, and Rich People, the book, to be different than the blog. Like the blog sort of blossomed into this like how to date post purity culture, which I want to write that book, but I didn't want that to be this book. I wanted this to be, as you said, an intimate look into what I was going through those first 3 years, and how I dug myself out of those like what I call the rubble years, where you've just knocked down a bunch of shit, but you don't yet know how to rebuild it. And then I wanted to tell people like how I rebuilt. And then I wanted to write another book that's like the other stuff of like getting through sexual trauma and learning how to date and not be afraid of men, and all under like the umbrella of purity culture, you know? And so anyway, so started writing in 2020. I ended up, one of my blog readers had just been hired as an editor for a new indie publisher in Phoenix. And that was the publisher that offered me my first offer. Now, my first red flag, I will say, is that when it comes to traditional publishers, whether they're indie or big houses, it is not a good idea to go with one who isn't through an agent, because your agent is going to negotiate your contract. And I would say perhaps this isn't true for everyone, but any publisher that seeks out authors without representation, they are banking on the fact that you just want the accolade of being published and you don't actually know what the contract says, what it means, and how basically they're going to fuck you over. They're going to take your IP and not give you any money. So that was essentially what happened with this indie publisher. I was really excited. I was like, oh my gosh, I don't even have to like get an agent. I don't have to go through any of that.
20%.
Yeah, exactly. Like the universe just gave me this publisher, right? And ultimately, and they gave me the contract and they told me, you have 2 weeks to get it back to us, and we don't make any negotiations. Like everybody gets the same contract, there are no negotiations. That was my first red flag. I was like, it's a contract. Like the nature of a contract is like you negotiate things. And so I got a lawyer and I had him look through it, and he was basically like, this is like, without telling me exactly what to do, he was like, this is a very bad contract. They are basically giving you what like a Simon and Schuster or a Penguin, Random House would give you without an advance. So they're not giving you an advance, and they're going to make you pay back what they spent to make the book in book sales. They don't have that kind of pool. They're a tiny indie house. They're not going to have that kind of distribution. You will never make a cent off of this book, on top of the fact that they want your ancillary rights. And I had the vision of making God, Sex, and Rich People a TV show. And they were like, so this tiny indie house is going to take so much of your rights and you're not going to make any money. So
Yeah, that
many
sucks.
authors do it. Yeah, so many authors do it, or they'll take like a really small advance. Like I've talked to so many other authors who have so many followers, right? Like they could probably get an amazing book deal and they get like a $5,000 advance or a $10,000 advance. And they're never going to make money past that advance. So I turned that down, and it was super smart because years later, another author from them came to me and said, hey, just wanted to let you know, super smart of you to turn down this offer because I am currently hiring lawyers to get out of my contract with them. And so was good that I trusted my intuition there. And then I took
That's great.
Sorry, go ahead.
Real quick, let me say some things. You've just been talking so much.
I know. Loquacious, that's the word.
No, those are some great insights you have about the publishing industry, and I want to bring up something that Keith from Choir actually said when he was on last time. We have I don't know if you've seen this, some of the other viewers might have. If you haven't, then you should check it out. How to Make a Living as a Full-Time Author
Yes.
is something
Mm-hmm.
that Keith has talked about. And when he was on the podcast, we were talking about that. He was saying the publishers, and let's just take the movie industry, for example, all the producers and the studios, they're not the creatives.
Yeah.
We as the creatives, we can do things they can't do. And
Yeah.
so we shouldn't let ourselves get pushed around by them. So I'm glad you're able to put your foot down on that. You may continue.
Yes. Yeah. And look, I have always trusted, like, with enough work that I did with that creative career coach, it's like I have a vision. Just because it hasn't come to fruition yet doesn't make it invalid, right? So I had this vision of God, Sex, and Rich People, the TV show, and I was like, they just can't take that from me. Like, I know that that's going to happen. And so anyways, after I turned that down, I was heartbroken. And I was sort of like, my ego was struck, right? Because I was like, I was supposed to be published by 30. And so then I took a little time off to write, direct, executive produce, star in, fund the proof of concept for the pilot of the TV show. And that is how I spent 2021. So then I came back in 2022 after I shot that. And alongside getting it into festivals and whatever else, I started writing the book again. And I was like, I will finish this book. Right. So that is how I spent 2022. And then I submitted my first draft for edits in fall of 2022. And then I've just been working on it since then. Once we got to 2020, fall of 2023, and it was like done, I thought I was going to release it in December of 2023. Let me give you a little background. Before I even started writing, well, no, it was when I had started writing the book. Yes, I got dinner with Linda K. Klein. She wrote that book, Pure. I call her like the foremother of purity culture literature. It released in 2016, right around the time Donald Trump. And like, it was just, it's a very, very well-known book in the purity culture space. I got dinner with her, and she had said to me, trust the timing of your book. Her book took 10 years to get out into the world. And by the time it did, she was like, I'm so glad that it happened when it did, because I don't think the world would have been ready for it if it had happened pre-Donald Trump. So I just held on to that. I was like, I'm not going to rush this. I'm going to trust the timing of my book. If it's not feeling right, like, it's okay. I'm just going to keep following the next step. So fall 2023, I hire a publicist, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to do all this PR for the next 3 months, and then we're going to release it in December. I don't even have like a cover art or anything yet, but we're going to figure it out. And then as I'm doing that sort of like PR tour, I'm getting really big interviews. At the time, I got like the interview with Tim Whitaker at the New Evangelicals. Like, I had gotten just some pretty prominent interviews, right? And my publicist and another author that I met up with, they were both like, I just don't think this is a self-published book. I think this is bigger than that. And I think you're going to really sell it short if you just self-publish, which that's not to like, negate people who do self-publish. There are many reasons to self-publish, and I get it. But like, the advice I was getting from many people is this is bigger than that. So then I was like, okay, fine, back to the drawing board. I guess I'll start querying agents. And so I took some time between December 2023 and February 2024, and I just started querying agents and going through that whole process with the proposal, even though I'd already written the book, right? And all of the agents just kept saying the same thing. They were like, you have a very compelling story, a very strong voice, but no one's going to read a memoir by a first-time author that doesn't have a bunch of Instagram followers. Like, to write a memoir that people want to read, you have to actually have a lot of people who know you. And so they all just kept telling me, take 3 years, build your following, build your subscriber list, and then come back to us. I was like, I'm not waiting another 5 years at this point to get this book out into the world. It's already done. Yeah. Like, I want to move on to my next book. So I just didn't know what I was going to do, because I just kept getting that reply. And then I heard an ad for Heather Hamilton's book, Returning to Eden, which is a choir book, on the New Evangelicals. And really just for like advertising questioning, I was like, how did she get this ad on the New Evangelicals? I want to do that with my book when it's time to come out, So I reached out to her, And then she told me about choir. And I was like, I didn't even know this was a thing, like hybrid publishing. I didn't know this was a thing. And so that's when I linked with Matt. I believe it was in February or March of 2024. That's when I linked with them. And that's when I realized, okay, this is my path forward. This is what's right for this book. And I'm so beyond happy it happened the way that it did. I released it a year after I thought I was going to release it, but it's all worked out so beautifully because I had a full year of PR to build it up. I just had an amazing book launch party. Like, it just happened so much better than it could have if I just like rushed it, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
that's the timeline.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
So coming here to an end, as I
Mhm.
was stalking your Instagram, as I do with all the authors, you're not special. I saw you've had some opportunities arise around this book and the release. Now you mentioned the pilot for the TV show. Can you talk a little bit more about that or other things that are upcoming?
Yeah, so the TV show sort of got like put on the back burner as I was continuing to get this book out in the world, but I really do feel like getting the book out has already ignited a lot of interest about the TV show. So I'm glad that I wrote, directed, did all of that with the pilot back in 2021 because it just shows that it's not just an idea. I did actually put some force into it, right? It is tangible. And then on top of that, my pitch for the TV series won the Audience Choice Award at the Yale Innovation Summit this past May. So even like having like an Ivy League accolade behind it, like has given it some sort of legitimacy. So then when I did, and then the book release happened at Noya House, which is Noya House LA is like more popular. I think they're trying to get the one in New York to be as popular, but it's a members only artsy fartsy club, and they hosted my book launch party. So I feel like between the book, having the pilot, having won that pitch competition, I've gotten a decent amount of people who like want to take meetings about it, right? They're sort of like with publishing, like there are sort of traditional ways you can go about it. You can have the pilot fully fleshed out and have a pitch deck all together and get an agent and whatever. I sort of feel like my way to getting this thing to happen is just going to be through all of this and like taking meetings with people who are like, we're interested, can we attach a producer onto this and like move it forward, you know? In addition, I also, from the Yale competition, I got accepted into this creative incubator through MIT. So they're taking science innovation and they're applying it to the arts. And so within that incubator, we're sort of laying out the big vision for God, Sex, and Rich People. And another part of that is to create a one-woman show, which I get super excited about. And then
What do you
premiere
mean
it
one
in
woman show?
one-woman show, like a theater piece.
Okay.
So like a theater piece of like pieces of the book and beyond, where I'm playing all the parts and having all the conversations, you know. And we would premiere it in New York and then tour it to like college campuses and around the US, and then have talkbacks about purity culture and the influence of religion on sex education and the harm. And then also obviously like sell the books, yada yada. It's like a package deal. So this is what is to come with God, Sex, and Rich People. TV show, one woman show, tour. This is like all down the pipeline.
Look at, you're going to be famous.
Yeah. No, it's so funny. Like I actually, like I don't really care about the like the fame and all of that, whatever. I do have a feeling recently of like I have been working at this for so long. Like this has been 10 years in the making and it's only going to keep going. I would like to see beyond just the book, which I've already been feeling like very, very successful with the book. Like, you know, those bigger moments of success, because it's like you pour so much into it, you want to see it pay off, you know?
Yeah.
But then it's like you don't just do it because you want it to pay off, you do it because you love it, like, and all of that too as
Yeah, but the
well.
paycheck is nice too, right?
Yes, exactly. I mean, oh my God, I was like, don't come into this interview with this energy, but just for like true realness, I have had to go back to my babysitting for billionaire jobs after this like high of a weekend of releasing my book. And I am like, I am so ready to not have a plebe job. I can't believe I am like an established author, like was #1 in my category, was, did so well. And then, or in genre, not category, genre. And like, I just hosted this chic party in New York City. And now I'm like wiping butts at a playground, baby.
Well, I think everybody always says you don't get into writing for the money. So I think we're in the
Right.
wrong industry.
Right.
It's the
Right.
movies.
I
That's what
know.
we're all heading towards, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I think you expressed some hesitancy in reading an excerpt, but if you would like
Oh.
to, you're more than welcome to.
Okay. Okay. I just don't know. I'm going to try to abbreviate it to the best of my ability. You know what? I'm just going to start. It's going to be very brief. It's a
Okay.
part of the preface.
There better be at least one unfuck in there.
I think there is.
Okay.
I think there is. Okay. For the evangelical skeptic who thinks this book will be full of God-smearing terms and atheist tantrums, I will explain what this book isn't. This book is not a universal, tyrannical, angry effort to make everyone reject Christianity. No, no. I pinky promise you, I have zero investment in your religious affiliation. What I do have an investment in, however, is your religious experience. I am deeply concerned with freeing you of the noise that Jesus culture, a culture where everything is influenced by the evangelical representation of Jesus, has buried you in over the years. I am interested in pulling you out of the shame rubble and into living truly your most abundant life. Basically, I am here to Marie Kondo your relationship with God. I would also like to state that I am not an expert on religious or sexual trauma therapy. I am simply a 30-year-old woman who spent the first 22 years of life as an evangelical in rural Missouri and the past 8 years as an actor in New York City, unfucking myself from the layered trauma bestowed upon me by the first 22 years. And I want to share a little bit of that unfucking process.
2 unfucks. Nice.
That being said, though I don't go into detail about my experience with rape and sexual trauma therapy in this book because I believe that's another book entirely, I am a huge proponent and advocate for anyone who has lived through evangelicalism and purity culture to get professional help in the form of a sexual trauma therapist. As you read, rec, and reconstruct, an almost alliteration, remember, do not abandon yourself. You are recovering beautifully. You are not a heartless bag of dicks.
Thank you. I think there was 2 bag of dicks a little bit later on as well.
I think there are 3.
Okay.
I used the rule of 3s in that intro. Yeah, I do.
It was off to a
say it
strong
twice
start.
before.
That's all I can recall. It was great.
Yeah,
Mattie
I had
Jo.
a producer who read this and he was like, "Oh man, bag of dicks. That's really got to make the TV show." I was like, "Oh, it will."
No, I loved how you use things like LOL or like BRT, like just like texting stuff, and I was like, only millennials would understand this. Like,
Yeah.
boomers are gonna be like, what the hell is this?
Yeah. Yes.
Mattie Jo, any final comments?
I don't think so. I mean, just thank you for having me. Thank you for giving me a chance to talk about my publishing and writing journey because that's not something I've really been asked about a lot. And I think it's so important for creatives to, have this as a resource of like what the process is because it's so different for so many people. So, yeah, thanks for letting
right.
me share in transparency.
I loved it. Thanks for coming on, everybody. We had Mattie Jo Cowsert.